Hello, everybody. This is Tim, and on the other line is a certain someone. Would you care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, this is Meta Rockwell, also known as Jeremiah, in a place with Tim today.
We basically want to talk about the importance of maps and world building, setting creation, all that good stuff. And I guess a good place to start is just the map itself. How have you made maps?
I all kinds of different ways. I try every angle on it. Angle with it. I usually start with pencil and paper and just start drawing like googly shapes until I see some type of like maybe island or border that I like, and then I might have a general idea of like the basic background of, let's say, like the race and the people that I want to create with. So I'll generally put their little area in, make a little symbol for their village or town or wherever they live. And then I just kind of like start doodling with the map, I might put a river in kind of randomly, and as I'm drawing the river, I'll think of a neat idea about how the river might end into a cavern, or I'll start using my imagination to try to create a very unique environment. And as I'm doing that, like the ideas of how I'm gonna fill out the story about this place start coming into mind. The last map that I did for the Call of Lions game that I'm trying to design. Basically, it's just like a small little circular type of island. The village is on the south, and I drew like this big like hole in the middle of the island. I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with this big hole? And I was like, okay, well, it connects to the sea. This is the sea caves. And as I did that, I put like a little dragon head sticking out as a mythos of maybe there's some kind of sea monster that lives in the sea caves. And so I just kind of let it come out naturally. Start off with a small backstory of the people I want to create. Start drawing and let my imagination kind of take it away. And usually, if I'm done, if I like my sketch and I like my idea or the shape of the land, and I'll take that, I'll scan it, take that to Photoshop or CorelDRAW or something like that, and digitalize it, make it real fresh and crisp looking. And it's basically how I make my setting backstories. I like to start off with imagery first, and I just look at the image that I drew and then come up with a story about it.
You were talking about rivers. The way I usually do rivers is I usually do mountains first. I've done maps in Paint. I've done maps in Illustrator. I've done just drawing first, and then going and doing things later. Like you were talking about drawing with the squiggly lines. But I tend to put in mountains. Like I'll figure out where the coastline is for the continent or area or wherever it is, and then I'll plop like a range of mountains. And as a general rule, like water flows downhill. So I'll start the rivers like springs in the mountains coming down, and then I try to they meander. And then as they meander, you kind of look at the line, like, okay, the water's at the lowest point. So it's kind of like it starts to form sort of like a rough topographical map. Like, these are the low points of the land, so there's probably like maybe plains around these areas. Maybe there's some rolling hills, and that's why it's squiggly in this one area. So actually, rivers are kind of, mountains and rivers are sort of influential to me, like try to figure out how the land actually, like the elevation of the land, how it all works together. And like you were saying, I tend to do the natural landscape first. So I'll try to just make as much as I can with the natural landscape, and then I think, okay, who lives here? Do they like the river? Do they like the mountains? What area would they fit in best? And like you were saying, just things start to pop in my head.
Yeah. I'm taking a look at my map now, and I like some of the things that you have mentioned, I kind of neglect, and it kind of causes me trouble in the long run. But I end up trying to use some type of like creative, magical explanation. Where is my river coming from? I didn't think about the source sometimes, and I'll do all this stuff like, okay, my river just starting out of nowhere, and so I have to make make up and reason why. And I think sometimes that's why I don't like writing too much script on what I have to draw when it comes to my art time, or when I want to put in my art expression into the setting making. If I write too much script about what I'm drawing, sometimes I feel limited, like I gotta follow this, or but when I put that to the side and just draw, it seems like I'll come out with like interesting things. Sometimes those interesting things don't necessarily make sense or work in our physical world, but that gives me a chance to like, okay, how can I make this work?
That's the nice thing about magic. Like you were saying about that river, maybe there's like some dimensional rift. Like it comes out of some other plane of existence. There's a river that just ends in some other world or something. that,
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
It's like I don't know if I explained this once we hit record, but like I guess I'll repeat it again. And basically, the island that I drew up here was it's floating in the sea called the Circaeus Sea, which is Circle Sea because the island moves in a circle according to the gravitation pool of the atmosphere and the planets around it, whatever.
Okay.
And so as it's going around, like it stays in its same position. So south is always south to the island, north is always north, and so forth. But there's like a hole in the middle, and that hole, like I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that hole. I just drew it there, and I'm like, okay, what can I do with this hole? So I ended up making like an entrance point to the sea underneath through this hole. I started thinking like an aquifer or something like that. I live in Florida, so aquifers, we have caves underneath Florida all over the place, water caves.
Okay.
And so I thought that would be a pretty interesting thing. Like you got these old kind of tribalistic kind of culture. They don't have much technology yet. A lot of mythos. I mean, they even spook themselves about what they believe. They haven't even ventured through the whole island yet. Some places there's just no-go zones. And so I figured, like, okay, the sea cave dead in the middle of the island with this possible sea monster, that like totally fed a lot of the other ideas after that. And it all started because I just made a squiggly circle in the middle of the map.
It sounds kind of like.
I know that might sound unorthodox, but it's where I get my most, I think, creative ideas from. It's when I don't try to use anything that's preset. I just like throw a blob on the paper and see what I can make out of it in a way.
It kind of sounds like Loch Ness or something, where it's very, very deep, not necessarily very wide. Is that so? It's pretty much a
yeah,
whole.
Very deep, not necessarily wide. Yeah, it's probably you could probably fit about 4 or 5 villages, and the villages would probably be like very small, like 150 people, 200 people. So like yeah, it's a very small opening in the middle of the island. I put in a forest called the Katri Forest, and also the Shades, which is a small forest. One of the original inhabitants were born out of the Katri Forest. That the city itself, or the town, or I should say the village, is Abia. And all these names that I'm using come from different types of cultures in the world, not necessarily your Western culture. Shaki, Abia, Amoja is the name of the island itself. So I always try to like also look for the vast, we have a big world here, and we have so many different people and so many different countries, and there's so many rich histories and mythologies in all these places. And I have fun digging in those places because it feels like I'm just now cracking open a mythological book for the first time. If I get a book from Bali or Asia or something, and I read it, I'm like, wow, the island of Bali, they believe to this day that their cities floating on a turtleback. And I thought that was amazing to all the way into these times that people still believe somewhat of those old ideas, or we could say old mythological ideas, but some people believe them as truth today in different places in the world. So in a way, it's like I like to call that living mythology, because it's still alive today. It's not just something that we used to think back in the day. There's people that still, live that type of magical idea around them in their day-to-day lives. So I try to pull from all those different places. It's such a rich world of ideas. So I like to get names from there. It's a mixture. My maps are like a mixture of like finding different names and words along with different shapes and designs. And then the more I put all those things together, the more it starts telling a story of its own. The map starts bringing out some type of dialogue that I converse with. And eventually, a plot is written, or a land is created, and a quest is set, for the players to possibly play in that setting.
What I like a lot what you're saying is I'm totally with you in that if I learn something about a really cool area of the map or the world, the real world, that I think would be perfect, for a fantasy setting, I have no problems basically taking from anywhere. Like you were saying before we hit record, about a lot of fantasy settings are based on Western Europe and the medieval times and so forth. That what's to stop us from taking mythologies from the Inuits or
Yes.
any sort of culture you can possibly glean anything from. It really depends on what you. It sounds like you've dabbled a lot in different cultures, different mythologies. I have a big old book about just random mythologies and random places from mythologies, and they're very interesting books. I haven't actually got like they're more like it's like reading an encyclopedia sort of. So
Yeah.
you can't really just read through it, but there's tons of ideas and things that you can grab from. And I like to reskin real world mythologies, or sometimes combine two religions or two mythologies, kind of like Frank Herbert did with the Dune series, like
Yeah, yeah.
Mahayana Christianity or things like that, where they just take two seemingly so different religions or whatever, in quotes, and just blending them together and seeing what the result would be. So that's the cool thing about making fake places.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's almost like I feel like all these worlds. Tolkien probably experienced this. It's almost like I have a memory of all these places, and I don't know if I'm getting too out there with it or not. But when I start creating these places, I feel like, okay, this possibly could exist back in the day. I mean, who knows? I mean, we play enough games to give us the hint that we could have had 2 nuclear wars since now. And this is the third generation of humans redoing it all over again. So sometimes I feel like there's a connection to the more that I try to mix all these cultures in that we know of today really all came from like a certain time, and it was more connected at a certain time, or it was understood. I don't know if you've ever watched the documentary. I know there's some on YouTube, and I think BBC put out a lot of them about certain old school maps. One of them is the map of Mundi, or I don't know how you want to pronounce that, but Mundi or Mundi, and it's a really old mythological map, and it's so old that east is north. And
Oh wow, that's cool.
Jerusalem, back in those days, everybody looked at Jerusalem as the place to be. Even the Western people, the Catholics, Jerusalem was the main place to be. And so they put that as their north perspective,
I see.
But when you look at all the lands that nobody has traveled yet, like the closer you get to the civilization, the Western civilization, the more normal it looks, the further out you get that where there's yet to be exploration is where you get your mythological monsters. So if you look at the continent of Africa, you'll see like these big, almost like orcish type characters. And then if you look in Asia, you'll see like these real slender like dragon beasts and sea monsters. And I thought that was interesting. It's like a lot of our mythology might have come from just the fact that we don't know what's on the other side. So we started thinking, okay, what's over there? And in our own imagination, our own thought of what's on the other side has kind of created this mythological, world just in our imagination. But as time rolls on, those symbols and those, I guess, imaginations start being embedded or engraved into our society with all types of different, channels, whether it be religion, culture, music, art, dance. And then by the time you get to like the modern times, where we're at now, just is so much there that it's like, is that real? Is that, or is it fake? But to me, that's the beauty that it's unanswered. There's a passage in a very popular book on this planet, and it's about a beast called Leviathan.
Yeah.
And it says in that passage, I can't quote it perfectly, but these wonders have been put on the earth for man to glimpse, but never to prove. It's what keeps us going. It's what keeps us moving. It's if we found the ultimate wonder of the planet, our imagination would cease. We would no longer, we found the answer. It's time to go home now or something.
We need an enigma. We need a mystery. We need.
Yeah. And I think that's, that's the beauty of RPGs to me. The big part of just creating them and playing them is that you can really explore all that, and almost act out your own relationship to our past, our history, all the different cultures in the world. Like, I'm not a big traveler. It's hard for me to get out the country. So, like, this is like a door for me to experience all that. If I get, if I watch a nice documentary or something about a different nation and their history and lore, it just really influences me. When I studied Persia in its golden times, and like, their old ruins. It's hard to see today because a lot of the turmoil that's going on over there in the East.
Yeah.
So you don't really get to see all the beauties that's behind the scene, and there's some very magnificent places on this planet that it continuously feeds me. It's always feeding me. And I feel like the more that imagination grows, the funner I have, and That's what brings the joy to RPGs to me. If it wasn't, I never found myself playing like more modern games. I'm not knocking them. It's just I feel like I live in that world, like I live in the gun violent kind of world, or I live in the almost like, I hate to say it, but the common adversities today that are not as magical. They're more about, money and survival and all that. So I never really liked playing modern games or modern, futuristic games.
There's something to be said about the supernatural element in games. I've had a hard time. Like, I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine that tried to run Firefly and Serenity, and there really isn't too much of a supernatural bent at all in that universe. It's kind of, sci-fi. And he ran like 3 adventures of it, and then he told me to take the game over because he's like, I just can't do it. It's like there's no magic. There's no mystical force that I can blame for things that I mess up on, or there's no. He didn't realize it before he ran it, but how much he used that sort of theme or trope in a lot of his other games. Like even like World of Darkness has supernatural stuff, all that stuff. And then when he tried to run just a straight modern day world, it held no appeal for him. So it's exactly what you're saying. It's like I play a human every day in a modern setting. Why do I, it just doesn't work for me. I want to play a dwarf, or I want to play some other weird race in, one of Tim's settings that's bizarre, whatever. It's just something different.
Yeah, I'm sure that varies with a lot of different people, so I'm definitely not knocking the modern setting at all.
Yeah.
It's just, it's hard for me to find a reason for a lot of things to happen, and, it just feels kind of normal to me, and, I guess it depends on where you grow up to, and, when I always try to break away, like it's escapism for me. So like definitely the magic gives me a reason. It's not really that things have to be magical, but the idea of just applying that concept to a game or a creation process allows me to like venture out and explore with ideas that ain't so hard set. Like it gives me more option to make things happen. I guess in your example is like, if something happens and, if you make a call on something happening, but you got everybody or your players are disagreeing because it's not realistic.
Yeah.
Like how it's like it's hard for you to like, I guess run a game when you can't use that power of imagination. And
you like pull out the magic card. It's like, well, like you were saying about the river. Well, why is there a river that's not coming down a mountain? It's the magic card.
Yeah, and that's what when I first started watching your channel, I noticed that you had a broad sense of what is possible in your settings, and I really enjoyed that. That's one of the first things I was like, wow, this dude's really out there with some of his ideas. But I like how you brought it together. You still brought everything together. You put enough backstory to what you're doing that even though it's really mythical and magical, it still made sense. And that's the beauty. It's like, how do you touch both of those worlds together?
Yeah, how do you
make it playable? That's nice.
So that it makes kind of sense with there's still that boundary of sort of disbelief. I think is what you're trying to say. Like it can be realistic, but yet not. Like you have to try to. It's almost like you have to make a setting have its own rules, its own physics, its own reality, and like you were saying, this like burning heaven, the sky's on fire. That's one of the laws of that setting. That's just part of what it is. And then you think, well, okay, that's one thing. So how does that affect everything else? And then you really can sit down and think a lot about how one change in a setting, especially as you're making it, like you're talking about, like that river that comes out of nowhere, that could be a big deal depending on where that river comes from. And if you think about that a lot, I don't know. I like what you're saying about bringing in mythology and yet trying to have some realism, and then having it all make sense within the setting. Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, there's probably a lot of real world examples. I mean, like, I know it's cliche examples, but they hold their weight and time and everything. Is like, you look at the big airplane. I mean, that's a big, heavy piece of metal that you just slinging through the sky. I mean, there was a time where that is completely. What are you talking about? There's no way. There's no way that thing's going to be floating in the sky, but we put it in the sky, and I don't know, maybe we can call that technology. There could be a disagreement or debate on what is magic and what is technology, and is magic really magic, or is it magic just a limit? Is reality just really limited by our imagination?
Isn't that an Arthur C. Clarke quote? I think something like that. That technology or high technology and magic are indistinguishable at some point, like. Like,
I totally see that. I mean, this off or bits and pieces of even the Atlantis, the story of Atlantis, where supposedly, I know there's a lot of different stories, but one of them I was always attracted to was like the priest, and you had the scientists and the priest all kind of working together for so long, making this utopic place to live, and everybody was